Welcome, family and friends. This is Kevin Thomas, the author of the book Poet Thomas. I am coming to you from my home, like the rest of us who are stuck in shelter in place. I wanted to bring to you an opportunity to allow you to hear my book tonight, Poet Thomas. Uh, thought I thought about doing this because I know, like a lot of you, myself and your families and friends are stuck in the house, and I said, well, why not provide a little bit of entertainment tonight and read to you my book, Poet Thomas. This is for you to be a part of. You can stay the whole night and go through the story. We will go from 7 to 9 p.m. I have never read my full book in public. I have read, chapters here and there, out in public, but I did, read the book to myself, and it normally takes me about an hour and about a half to get through the whole book. We will read this tonight. A little bit about Poet himself, the story. The story Poet came from um, a training that I used to give on working with youth in challenging circumstances. That training had a case study, and that case study involved this character named Poet Thomas that the individuals in the training had to work with. At the end of each training, I always had individuals who would come up to me and say, Mr. Kevin, you need to make that character a book. And so Poet Thomas grew out of that environment. He is a microcosm, a combination of my life growing up as a child, as well as the students that I had the privilege to work with over the years. And so I want you to listen, enjoy this evening, sit back, and enjoy a night live with Poet. As we go through each chapter, you will see an overlay that will pop up on the screen that kind of reflects each chapter and what we're going through. And so, again, you can stay for the whole show and listen to the whole book, or you can look and listen to bits and pieces of the book. Poet Thomas is available on Amazon right now. And so, if you would like to purchase your own copy of the book, head on over to Amazon and pick up a copy of your book, Poet Thomas. I do not think you will be disappointed in his story. So, what do you say? Let's get started. Chapter 1, Fatherless Child. Poet, get yourself out that bed. I'm not going to tell you again. Okay, Ma, as Poet responded, and make sure you make that bed up and pick those clothes up off the floor. Poet struggled to pull himself from the comfort of his bed as light snuck through his window blinds. Listening to the constant bark of his dog, Pancho, and the music coming from his parents' room, Poet follows his mother's commands and slowly pushed himself out of bed. His mother was in the kitchen cooking breakfast and preparing lunch for his father. She was a hard-working woman who worked as a secretary at a local school. His father owned and operated a mechanic shop. On weekends, Poet would spend hours watching his father work on cars as if he were creating magic. In Poet's eyes, the cars he saw coming to his father's shop were dead. To him, you had to know magic to bring them back to life, and his father always knew the trick. His mother loved poetry so much, she wanted to name him after one of her favorite poets. However, she had so many to choose from that she just decided to name him Poet. He became fond of his mother's passion for writing and poetry. Oftentimes, she would read to him before he would go to sleep. He always enjoyed her favorite poem, Son to Mother, by Langston Hughes. It became not just a poem, but a symbol of the pain and gratification that his life would soon embark on. He and his family lived in Miami, Florida. There were no palm trees and beaches, at least not in his neighborhood. His house was small but quaint. It had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. There was a small back porch where he spent most of his time watching TV, writing, or doing homework. The backyard was occupied by an old shed where his father would keep his tools. There was also a huge mango tree that provided constant shade from the heat for Pancho, his dog. He lived on Jackson Street in a neighborhood called Richmond Heights. It was a neighborhood that contradicted the palm trees and beaches that symbolized his city. His street was always animated. He and his friends would spend hours playing every sport and game imaginable. You see, while Jackson Street provided unlimited fun, his parents were not unaware of the dangers that his neighborhood constantly provided. While fun was offered during the day, dangers of crime were equal at night. When street lights came on, his mother's voice could be heard echoing, "It's time for you to come into the house." It was in his early years that he grew interested in writing poetry. It would be his writing that would get him through all the difficult times that his life would bring. Like any child at 9 years old, he was filled with curiosity that allowed him to take in everything his brain could absorb. His childlike curiosity would soon give him a hard lesson that he would never forget. On a rainy day, Poet got out of his bed as his mother expected and washed his face. He made his bed, picked up his clothes from the floor, and headed to the kitchen, following the smell of bacon and eggs that his mother was preparing. "Honey, did you clean your room?" she said. "Yes, I did." "After you eat, go get dressed. We have to go out today." Poet's mother never worked during the summer months when school was out. She spent most of her time cleaning the house and going shopping. He himself never jumped at the chance to participate in this Saturday ritual. He thought she always took too long. And two, unlike his pops, his mother would hardly ever purchase things for him. If he wanted candy, it was no. If he wanted something to drink, it was no. And if he asked for a toy, she would look at him with eyes that would cut through him, making him regret he even asked. Poet got up from the table and he headed to his room to get dressed. As he passed his parents' room, he saw his father putting on his shoes. His father looked up and saw him watching. "Good morning, son," his voice echoed as he stood to grab his watch. "Good morning. Can I go to work with you today, Pops?" "I'm sorry. I have a lot of cars to fix. But I promise you can come with me tomorrow." "Okay," Poet replied. "What's wrong? You don't want to go shopping with your mama?" "No, she takes too long, and we're going to be in those stores forever." He laughed. "Son, now you know why I don't want to go shopping with your mother." Poet turned to head to his room when his father stopped him. "Son, what do you do when your back is against the wall?" Poet replied, "You tear it down brick by brick." "Why do you tear it down, Poet?" "Because obstacles stand still, but life moves on forever." "And what's your choice, Poet?" "I have a choice to stand still with my obstacles or move on with my life." His father shook his head in approval and told him to have a great day. Poet returned to his room to get dressed. He and his father had a special bond, one that was built on his father's teaching him what it takes for him to be a man. With his father off to work, Poet and his mother headed out to the stores. As they stopped at a local Kmart, his eyes happened to fall on a pack of football cards that he wanted. Already knowing his mother's answer to the question, he decided he would put the cards in his pocket when her eyes were busy browsing. There was only one problem. How was he going to get those cards in his pocket without getting caught? His little mind contemplated all different types of scenarios, but none was good enough to trump the fear of getting caught. As they walked through the rows in the store, he noticed his mother putting clothes into the shopping cart. At that moment, his plan for success became very clear. She was going to the fitting room. She always left him outside on the bench while trying on clothes, and Poet knew he would have at least 10 minutes to get back to that aisle with the cards and back seated without his mother knowing. When she walked over to the fitting room, he counted exactly 3 lanes that separated the cards from the fitting rooms located in the back of the store. As she went inside, she reminded him to sit and wait until she came back. His mother, sitting inside the fitting room and out of his sight, at that moment, Poet decided it was now or never if his plan was going to work. His heart started to pump faster and faster, and he felt like his feet had a mind of their own. He allowed enough time to pass, allowing his mother to undress. That way, she wouldn't come out to check. He got up and he walked past the first lane and looked back. He only had 2 more lanes to go, but it seemed like 10. He finally reached lane 3 and turned back to see if anyone was watching. With no one around, he grabbed the pack of cards, put them in his pocket, and made his way back to the seat. By the time his mother had tried on her clothes and stepped outside the fitting room, he had accomplished his first mission in his young life. They left the fitting room area and headed towards the checkout lanes. While behind his mother, knowing he had taken the cards without her knowing, he grinned from ear to ear. Standing in line, watching his mother put the clothes on the counter, he asked for candy, and as usual, she said no. But he was too excited from his mission to become upset. After she paid for the merchandise, they proceeded to leave the store when a sound, beep, 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 gained the attention of everyone around. His mother was asked to wait. The woman asked to see his mother's receipt, and with anger and disgust planted on her face, she unwillingly handed it over to her. Poet looked around trying to take attention away from his face, which painted the perfect picture of guilt. He quickly moved with his mother as they were told that they were fine and they could leave. But as they walked through the door, the sound went off again. The clerk asked his mother if there was anything that she possibly forgot to pay for. His mother yelled, "Lady, what the hell are you implying? Didn't you just check my receipt? I don't steal and I paid for everything." Her anger and outbursts caught the attention of the store security guard, who quickly came to calm her. Poet, who tried to look unaware of what was going on around him, caught the guard looking at him. The guard, a black man, tall in stature, with a belly that covered his belt, asked his mother to allow him to walk through the door alone. When Poet approached the door, the sound went off, but the only thing he heard was his heart beating. At that precise moment, Poet's mother was overcome with anger and sheer embarrassment. She grabbed him by the collar and checked his pockets. Inside were the cards. The look on her face said it all. "I'm going to whoop your ass when you get home." Poet tried to apologize, but the more he talked, the angrier she became. His mother proceeded to take off her belt right there in the store. The manager of the store came to Poet's protection, and he told her that she could not discipline him in his store. His mother's voice was stricken with anger, a face that could kill, in whose eyes were deep with determination. She looked at that man and said, "If you don't want my son stealing from you when he is 19, you better let me do my job while he's 9." Without another word, the manager stepped back and Poet's mother stepped forward, giving him lashes that he would never forget. Needless to say, that ended his career in becoming a professional thief. When they got home, his mother called his father at the shop and told him what happened. After hanging up the phone, he was ordered to his room. He sat in his room and he stared at his walls, thinking about how much worse his pop's whooping would be. He was 3 times stronger than his mother. His silence was interrupted when he heard his father's car pull into the driveway. He sat patiently waiting for the sound of his father's voice to call him into the living room. His anticipation was interrupted by his mother, who told him his father wanted to see him outside. His father didn't come outside, choosing to sit on the porch with his cigarettes. Poet went outside and sat down on the steps. His father sat in his chair, wearing a blue shirt stained from a hard day's work. His voice was surprisingly not filled with rage, but still, nonetheless commanding. "Your mother told me what you did today." Poet looked down. His father grabbed his chin, lifted it up, and told him that a man looks into a person's eyes when spoken to. He found himself staring into the face in his father's eyes. His voice seemed to echo as he spoke. "Poet, a man who steals is never respected, but a man who earns is respected by everyone. You don't steal the things you want. You don't fight or beg, but you earn everything. When you earn something and you work hard for it, you will not only get what you want, but you will appreciate it much more. Do you understand me?" Poet nodded his head yes, as he looked into the eyes of the man whose face would mirror his 25 years later. The conversation ended there, never to be spoken of again. He figured his father thought his mother had already done enough. Poet was taught 2 lessons that night. First, a man should never steal. And secondly, one man's anger can't compare to a woman's rage. It had been months since the incident at the store. Life for Poet went on as normal. His parents went to work. Him, he to school, and they always ate dinner as a family, discussing their day. Poet didn't know it at the time, but the life that he knew, would soon change. The security and the stability that he had grown accustomed to would soon be replaced by fear and pain. 2 days earlier, his father's shop was broken into. The criminals had taken some of his father's magic tools he used to bring dead cars back to life. Remembering what he was told a couple of months earlier, he thought to himself, thieves were men with no respect. One night, like any other, Poet sat in the living room watching television and doing homework as he waited for dinner and his father to come home. He listened to his mother sing as she washed the dishes and prepared the table. Her singing was interrupted by the sound of the phone ringing. His mother stopped her routine and she answered. Sitting on the floor watching television, Poet overheard his mother saying, "Okay, honey, I'll see you when you get home." His father would be working late, leaving Poet and his mother to eat dinner together alone. After dinner, he went up, washed up, and prepared for bed. He watched television with his mother and enjoyed listening to her laughs at her new favorite show. Moments later, the doorbell rang, and his mother went to the door to answer it. Poet tried to listen to the conversation, but he couldn't hear what was being discussed. He looked out the window and noticed two police cars in the driveway. While he contemplated why the cops could be at his house, he heard a terrifying scream come from his mother. He ran into the living room and saw her lying on the floor. The cops stood over her body. They attempted to help her stand. Poet stood motionless. Tears began to fall from his eyes as he witnessed his mother cry. His father had been shot trying to stop the second robbery at his shop. Once to her feet, his mother turned and saw Poet crying. She walked over to him and explained what happened. Honey, look at me. I need you to go to your room and get dressed. We have to go to the hospital. His mind went blank. Tears painted his face with sadness and fear. He did as he was asked, and they headed to the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, they were quickly escorted to his father's room. Listening to the weeping sounds of his mother, Poet looked at his father on a bed with tubes in his mouth. His mother stood crying uncontrollably, screaming for him to wake up. Poet was motionless and in shock. He looked at the man who did magic, bringing cars back to life, motionless, unable to bring himself back. He thought, Pop must not have been a magician after all. While his mother screamed and cried, he stared, watching as hospital attendants pulled the sheets over his father's face. The cries and pain from a woman who lost her other half echoed down the hall. As his father was being wheeled out of the room, it became to weigh on him that he would never hear his voice again, watch him work endlessly on cars, or sit on the porch with him and listen to his stories. His emotions seemed to drown out every sound around him, even his mother's cries. With tears streaming from his eyes, memories of his father began to take over his mind. The memories brought him back to the time when they would spend hours on the front porch. He reminisced about the conversations. The lessons his father taught would later be used as motivation when life seemed like it was too tough to handle. He recalled a lesson his father taught him about sticks. He told Poet to go and pick up some sticks. He told him to take each stick and break them one by one. He then instructed Poet to take the sticks and put them together and try to break them again. Poet tried as hard as he could, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break the sticks. His father told him that one stick by itself represents him alone. If you think you are going to make it in this world by yourself, like that one stick, you will easily be broken. However, as long as you understand you have a family that loves you and you surround yourself with good people, then, like all those sticks you put together, you could never be broken. Thoughts of his father were interrupted by his mother's hand touching his shoulders. He looked up and asked, Is Pops okay? She said, He's sleeping, but he's going to wake up in a better place. He knew his mother was only trying to be strong for him. She hugged him tightly. He cried, knowing he was now a fatherless child. Chapter 2. Hungry. Why me? Can somebody tell me, what did I do to deserve this? I am but a child, and already my life it is fixed. Fixed to bear pain, fixed to welcome struggle, and fixed to wear pity. Like any child, I wish to play, but the pain, struggle, and pity have become my reality. The clothes on my back are all I have to wear. A 10-year-old child with no shoes on my feet, bare. The cold is making love to my body, and I have not a sheet. So I curl myself up on my floor many nights, and I cry myself to sleep. I have a hard-working mother who is hardly ever there. A man who beats on her constantly. Why doesn't he care? Where is the water and the electricity? Where is the food? Why do I stay hungry? I am but a child. How could this be? Bearing this pain, welcoming this struggle, wearing this pity. I get down on my knees and cry into the nights. Why me? A year after Poet lost his father, life began to get harder. His mother worked hard, but no matter how hard she worked, she could never bring in enough money to keep up with the bills that were mounting. Every now and then, he would walk past her room and witness her crying. At 10 years old, he could see she was not the same strong woman she was in the past. After the passing of his father and the hardships that fell on them, her proud strength was starting to give way to the reality of struggle. She would deal with her pain in a particular way that wasn't quite pleasing. She would go to work, come home, prepare dinner, and make sure his homework was complete. However, before the end of the night, she would go to her room and drink herself to sleep. It was towards the end of the summer when he realized that life for them had forever changed. One evening, after dinner, Poet and his mother were sitting on the couch watching television. They were watching an interesting movie that captured Poet's attention. During the middle of the movie, Poet heard a car pull up. His mother went to the door. He tried to listen to the conversation, but was so captivated by the movie that he couldn't give the conversation full attention. Suddenly, he heard his mother begging, saying that she would pay the bill by the end of the week. His mother followed the man outside. A few minutes later, the lights in the house went out, and the movie that captured his imagination went silent. Poet quickly rose to his feet and looked out the window to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Staring out the window, he saw his mother walk towards the house and the white truck pulled off. At 10 years old, he realized his mother's hardships had finally caught up with her. Even though he couldn't see them, her voice and tears were telling the story. Poet, she wept. Go in the kitchen and get the flashlights out of the closet. In bed that night, he stared into the darkness, thinking about what had just happened. The quietness of the house was different. It was different than any other normal night. It seemed as if having no deeper, forcing him to fall asleep listening to his mother's whimpers and cries coming from across the hall. The first day of school for many of Poet's friends would be a day of excitement, but for him, it would be full of turmoil. Unlike his friends who stayed up all night thinking about which one of the new outfits they would wear, he stayed up thinking about his father and wondering if he would have breakfast. Wake up. It's time to go to school. His mother came into his room and opened the curtains to let the son assist in getting him moving. What did I tell you about leaving your stuff on the floor? She yelled at him as she nearly tripped over his pair of sneakers. He was ill and annoyed. The reply in his mind would have easily been responded with a slap if it was uttered aloud. If we had lights, then maybe you'd be able to see the stuff. He slowly picked himself up from his bed and made his way towards the bathroom. He turned on the faucet to wash his face and quickly realized that the only cold water that they only had cold water. With no hot water, he had no choice but to take a cold shower. Poet hated to take that shower that morning as he cursed his mother in his head because of her inability to pay the light bill. After his shower, he went back to the room to find something to wear, but his mother wanted to surprise him. She wanted him to go to school on the first day, looking like the rest of his friends, with new clothes. On the bed was a new pair of jeans, a shirt, and shoes. If those were new clothes, I prefer to wear the old ones, he said to himself. He was thankful for what his mother had brought him, but he was also embarrassed. She bought clothes from Kmart and shoes from Payless. He knew that he could get away with the clothes, but the shoes were something different. There were certain things you just did not do living in Richmond Heights, like run from a fight, be a snitch, or wear Payless shoes on the first day of school. After he was dressed, he made his way towards the door. His mother hugged him. She told him to do well and have a great day. Down the street, he saw his best friend, Lockhart, waiting for him at the corner. Lockhart was bigger than most boys their age. He was built like a tank. He wore fatigue pants, a white t-shirt, and an old pair of black Reeboks. Like Poet, Lockhart's situation was no better. It was their home struggles that created a bond between them that could never be broken. As soon as Lockhart saw Poet, he looked him up and down. He saw the shoes on his feet. Man, why you got those pro wings on? He laughed at the sight of his feet itching closer and closer. All Poet could do was tell him to shut up. When he got to the bus stop, he noticed students, especially the older boys, laughing at his shoes his mother had purchased. Man, I never felt so embarrassed in my life, he said to himself. All the other students looked cool with their name brand clothes and shoes. He was standing at the bus stop, a fifth grader, wearing pro wings. He was in the same class as Lockhart. His teacher name was Miss Lee. While Poet missed the summer and being outside riding bikes, playing sports, and hunting lizards, the excitement of going back to school helped him forget about the struggles that he was going through at home. He was now in the fifth grade, and up to this point, he had always made good grades. But that would soon change. Life for him was about to get worse, and as a result, his grades would suffer. The first day of school was normal. Poet got a chance to see old friends and meet new ones. Classes were simple and very little work. Miss Lee gave the class her spiel of the rules and what she would expect for them during the year. By the end of the day, he received a school supply list. He looked at the list and wondered how his mother, who can barely pay the light bill, afford name brand shoes, would pay for his school items. His day went by swiftly. When the bus reached his stop, he and Lockhart got off and they went their separate ways. As he approached his house, he noticed a car parked inside the driveway along his mother's car. Who could that be? He wondered. Poet walked into the house and put his bag down in front of the door. He met his mother's voice. I want you to meet a friend of mine. He looked up and saw a man sitting on the couch. Politely, he said, hi, and shook his hand. What's going on, Poet? My name is James. Mama asked James if he wanted something to drink. He nodded and she left them to become acquainted. Poet noticed James staring at the pictures nailed to the living room walls. So, he said as he turned and approached Poet, what kind of sissy name is Poet? Poet looked at the 6'3", 200-pound man and didn't answer. You know, me and your mother have been seeing a lot of each other. I just want you to know I don't plan on being your daddy. Before James could continue, Poet's mother walked back into the room. She had drinks in her hands and urged him to go to his room to finish his homework. James shouted, "Nice to meet you." Poet knew he would never get along with him. The feelings of anger would only get worse as James and his mother's relationship lengthened. Months had passed, and James' visits became more frequent, sometimes staying over for several nights. Poet hated his presence. His hatred grew 10 times stronger on a night when, unlike most kids who went to bed listening to the sweet sounds of tranquility, he heard the unforgiving sounds of his mother screaming. Poet heard his mother yell, "Get off me, James!" He jumped out of bed and he ran to the room and he started banging on the door. "Mama, mama, mama." The screams and hits grew louder. He heard James call his mother's names that made his hands bang harder on the door. "You stupid bitch. What the hell is wrong with you?" His fist, now hurting with pain from banging on the door, wasn't a match for the pain he felt for his mother on the other side. Suddenly, the hit stopped. The door swung open. James pushed him out the way and left. Poet ran to his mother and embraced her with a hug. His mother, covered in blood and tears, held him tightly and spoke softly. "It's okay. I'm going to be all right." That night, he lay next to his mother in her blood and tears. As she drank herself to sleep, Poet cried himself back to sleep. That would not be the last time that James would beat his mother. As the problems at home worsened, so did his grades in school. One night, when the electricity was off and his mother waited for her paycheck, he woke up with pains of hunger that would not allow him to sleep. Poet made his way towards the wall near the door. By habit, he flipped the light switch, quickly remembering there was no electricity. He used his hands to guide himself through the darkened house. At the refrigerator, he opened the door, hoping to ease the pain that kept him up most of the night. As he opened the door, the smell of rotten food lingered in the air, and he realized, like the day before, he would again go hungry. He slowly guided himself back through his darkened house, and he found himself standing in the doorway of his mother's room. "Mama, wake up. I'm hungry." It didn't matter how loud he yelled. She was too hung over to respond. That morning, he got dressed for school. However, the clothes that he wore were wrinkled and dirty. There was no electricity to wash or iron. He put on his dirty, wrinkled clothes and he headed off to school, hoping to get there in enough time so he could at least eat breakfast. He sat in class, his mind thinking back to the horrific night and the terrible morning. He was interrupted by Miss Lee, who called his name. "Poet, tell the class when Christopher Columbus came to America." He looked at Miss Lee, wanting badly to tell her what he was going through and of his hunger pains. Instead, he shouted out, "Lady, if that man doesn't have any food on that boat, I don't care when he came to America. Hell, I'm hungry." The class roared out with laughter, and Poet was sent to the principal's office. His first trip, but it wouldn't be his last. As life at home continued to get worse, so did his behavior in school, especially his anger. On one occasion, he got into a fight with another student for laughing at his shoes. His mother was called to the school. He sat outside the office listening to what was being said about him from the principal. He heard his mother yell, telling the principal that he didn't have a learning disability, nor did he have attention deficit disorder. He thought, I don't have a problem with learning. He reflected, how am I supposed to learn when I have no lights at home to study? And the silence that's supposed to help me is replaced by my mama screaming. He was forced to take a test at the end of the year to see if he had the ability to learn and keep up with the other students. On the day of the test, he sat in his chair looking at the principal, his teacher, and his counselor. There were several students who were required to take the learning disabled test, or as his friends would so eloquently put it, the local dummy test. They were tested in math, English, and science, and also history. He had 2.5 hours to take the test. However, it only took him 1 hour, finishing well before the other students. When Poet submitted his test, he was asked if he wanted more time, and he declined. Waiting for his mother to pick him up, he watched the principal, his counselor, and his teacher go to the office. They didn't close the door all the way, leaving it open just enough so he could hear what they were saying. He overheard that he passed the test. Knowing that they were talking about him, he listened attentively. He heard Miss Lee's voice. How could he pass this test, but he is failing in my class? Something isn't adding up. Poet thought, with all that education in that office, they can't figure out that I don't have a learning disability. Maybe I passed that test because I had some Captain Crunch this morning. Maybe I had hot running water down my back, giving me the energy to take this test. Maybe I'm failing school because I was hungry. As you can see, a lot of students, as we go to chapter 3, there are a lot of students that I work with who go through this. But that chapter in particular definitely hits home to me because I myself, as a child, was told that I had a learning disability, that I couldn't read or write as well as the other kids. And, that kind of um, fueled my desire as a child to kind of prove those individuals wrong. And so I sympathize with Poet, like a lot of my other students sympathize with him. So because he's a microcosm of so many children today who have to go to school hungry and have to answer that question of when did Christopher Columbus come to America? And to be quite honest, they never said they didn't know. They just didn't care. Like myself, if you would have gave me a pizza that day, I would have told you 1492. If you give those kids a box of chicken, they would tell you what time he came to America, what kind of boat he came over here on, what color socks he had on. Hell, they'll tell you what he had to eat on that boat. A lot of our kids that we work with and the kids that they try to label with these three-letter words are not that. They are simply going through things that a child at that age should never have to experience. As adults, we are taught when we go to work, if we hungry, we still have to complete our daily task at work. But asking an 8, 9, 10-year-old child to go to school for 8 hours who is hungry, who's experienced abuse, that's a little bit too difficult for them to do. So let's go to chapter 3, Grandma's Hands. Get me a little bit of water here. I hope you guys are still with me. With school ending and summer quickly approaching, Poet's mother was aware of her son's recent decline in behavior and his work at school, so she asked Grandma Pinky to come down and spend the summer with them. She wanted her to keep an eye out for Poet while she worked. Poet loved when his grandmother would come visit because she always got him things that his mother wouldn't. Whenever he would ask her why she bought him clothes or shoes that his mother wouldn't, she always said, Mamas get to say no, but grandmas, they get to say yes. Poet enjoyed his grandmother coming to visit, but he didn't care much about going to church when she came. Since his father had died, his mother didn't attend church like she used to. But Grandma Pinky, she was at church at least 3 days a week. He knew that while she was there, he would be too. The church they attended was a small white church adjacent to a popular convenience store. It was a small church that didn't have a parking lot. It had a sign on the front door that read, Our doors are always open. As they walked into the church, he was handed a piece of paper that was tied to a popsicle stick. Grandma, what is this for? It's a fan, honey. Why do they have paper fans? Don't they have any air conditioning in here? His grandmother laughed and told him to behave. It turned out they did have air conditioning, but 15 minutes into service, he realized it was broken. Throughout service, he noticed people in church started shouting and dancing, and the more they jumped, the harder it became. He was amazed watching women fall to the ground and grown men cry. It seemed as if the louder the preacher got, the more men would cry, and the more women would faint. His grandmother, while not as enthusiastic as some, constantly raised her hands towards the sky. The preacher shouted about how the devil is always busy, how the devil is always around, and that he never took a break. Listening to the preacher furiously woof about the devil, Poet thought, well, that devil must be taking a break today because it's so hot in here. I swear, I thought I just saw him drinking Kool-Aid. After about 3 hours of sweating, the service was finally over. When Poet and his grandmother walked outside, he overheard one of the women in the church warmly tell a visiting family, Y'all come back now, you hear? Our doors are always open. With his grandma, Poet said, Grandma, they need to open up those windows in there too. Grandma Pinky just laughed. When they got back home, Poet ran to his room and got out of his clothes. He knew that in about an hour, he would be sitting at the table full of delicious foods. Fried chicken, collard greens, potato salad, stuffing, cornbread, macaroni and cheese, sweet pies, cakes, all of which Grandma Pinky prepared with a passion that rivaled any cook. Her cooking was another reason he liked her visits so much. With his mother working so hard to maintain the bills, he hardly ever had meals that Grandma was happy to prepare. Every Sunday, after church, Grandma would cook huge meals, and she would invite Miss Louise over for dinner. Miss Louise was one of the women in the neighborhood who knew everything. She was a heavy-set woman, black and gray hair, hands that rivaled the roughness of his father's hard-working hands, and a voice that seemed to echo as she spoke. She could talk for days. She chewed some type of stuff that made her spit brown. Poet hated the sight of it. Sundays were mother and daughter days in his house. Both women in Poet's life would take shopping trips that would last for hours. On those days, because he was only 10, he had to go to Miss Louise with the other kids whose parents were out shopping. Poet didn't mind going because Lockhart would soon come with them. They would always find something to do. When you were at Miss Louise's house, the only thing you ate was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and you have iced tea to drink. No chicken, No hot dogs, no soda, just PBJs and tea. When it was lunchtime, they would sit they would all sit outside on an old wooden table in her backyard, and Miss Louise would come outside with a tray full of PBJs and tea. She would place the tray on the table while giving the kids the usual not to make a mess speech. After giving her speech, she would spit her brown stuff on the ground. Poet looked on the ground and he saw brown spit. He looked on the table and he saw brown peanut butter and brown tea, and he assumed that Miss Louise had spit inside his drink. Instead of eating and drinking, Poet and Lockhart would throw their lunches on the street. Late in life, as Poet aged, he realized Miss Louise never spit inside his food, and he came to wish he would have eaten those sandwiches that would have satisfied his hunger. He would soon come to appreciate her cooking, especially her fried chicken. During the summer, wherever you saw Poet, there was Lockhart. They spent their days with many of the children in the neighborhood, playing in the streets. Poet developed a bad temper after his father's death and the rise of his struggles. Lockhart had even a bigger temper that he wore proudly on his shoulders, like a badge of honor. It was in the middle of the summer that Poet had gotten himself into a fight with a boy in his neighborhood. The boy had made fun of his home life, unapologetically joked about Poet being poor and his mother's drinking habits. While all the kids laughing in anger building, Poet hit him with all his strength. Even though he was only 10 years old, he looked 12. When the fight was over, he ran home bragging about his win. Later that day, while Poet and Lockhart stood outside his house, the boy came back, wanting to fight again. He began yelling in the street, wanting Poet to approach him. He threatened to get his older brother to shoot him. Poet's mother heard the conversation and told him to come into the house. After explaining to her what happened earlier, she was so upset that she whooped him with more anger than when he stole the cards from the store. Poet never heard and saw his mother so angry, and she hit him with every ounce of power that she had. Every hit she gave was followed by words, and the more she talked, the harder her hits became. If you're man enough to fight out here in these damn streets, then you better be man enough to take this whipping. I bought your ass in this world, and I'll be damned if I don't take your ass out before I let someone else do it. Do you hear me, Poet? As she continued her lashes, he answered, shouting, yes, mama, yes. When she finished, she sent him to his room. Sitting in his room crying and angry, Poet didn't know if his mother was angry about the fight or if she was trying to teach him a lesson. He believed it was both, and he got the message. Poet's summer went on as usual, playing ball in the streets, sweating on Sundays, and throwing away PBJs from Miss Louise's house was about as normal as you can get for a kid who lived in the Richmond Heights. With his summer ending and the first day of school quickly approaching, Poet started to get his mind back into school mode. One of the reasons he hated the first day of school, besides his no name brand clothes, was listening to the other students talk about their great vacations. When it was his turn, he politely said, it was fun, and left it at that, not wanting to elaborate on why he threw away PBJs all summer. There were two things he hated about the end of summer. First, he dreaded going back to school. And secondly, he knew that Grandma Pinky would soon be leaving. Late one evening, when they were at the table eating, a loud knock echoed from the door. Poet's mother got up from the table. As soon as she opened the door, James rushed into the house. He was drunk and in a ranting fit, accused Poet's mother of being ashamed of him. James had not been to their house at all during the summer. Poet's mother did not want Grandma to meet him. With Grandma being a devout Christian, she would never have approved. With shock in her eyes and fear in her voice, Poet's mother told him to quiet down. As she approached the dining room, James followed her and grabbed her by the arm. His mother turned around yelling, "Let me go, James." When she turned, James hit her so hard that she flew back against the dining room table. Poet quickly ran to his mother, watching her eyes roll in the back of her head and the blood roll down from her mouth. He cried, wanting her to get up. He looked up and he saw Grandma Pinky standing in front of James with a knife across his throat. James was motionless and mute, but Grandma's words were loud and clear. "Mister, I don't know who you are, but I know this. If you put your hands on my daughter one more time, I promise you, as God as my witness, I will not be the only mother here crying." James, all 250 pounds of him, towered over Grandma Pinky's tiny body. His eyes glazed red with anger, and his body reeked the smell of alcohol. Yet Grandma's Pinky's face was seemingly holding back rage, was stoic, and she refused to move. James quickly turned and looked at Poet's mother. He walked out the door, leaving their lives for good. Grandma's words did something that his mother's cries could never do: make James leave. That night, Poet sat in the hallway looking at his grandmother's care for his mom, her daughter, healing both her wounds and stopping her tears at the same time. He stood amazed. How could this woman, who had hands so strong, stop a drunken man's rage and a woman's pain all in the same night? Later that night, while Poet was in bed, Grandma Pinky came into the room to make sure he was all right. "Poet," she said, "promise Grandma one thing, that you would never, ever hit a woman." "I promised," he replied confidently as she kissed him on his forehead. Before she left, Poet stopped her. "Grandma, what did you mean when you told James that you would not be the only mother crying?" Grandma Pinky turned and smiled. "That man has a mama too." Chapter 4 is next. As you can see, um, Grandma Pinky was Poet's, hero, and I think in this book, you will come to notice that there are villains and heroes and antagonists, um, and individuals who Poet, will come in contact with that will help shape the type of person he would become. And like all of us, we had those individuals in our life that helped shape us. That person could be negative or positive. For Poet, Grandma Pinky became one of those inspirational um, individuals who became somebody that Poet can always lean on and somebody that he can always talk to. Um, Poet himself loved his grandmother, and so she would become an inspiration to him uh, that would carry him throughout the rest of his life. Um, so pay attention as we move forward with Grandma Pinky's words. Chapter 4: Lessons from Souls of Old. Now in junior high school, it had been 2 years since Poet had seen James. After years of struggling, Grandma Pinky moved into their house. He didn't mind because he loved her. And even though the church still had no air conditioning, he enjoyed going, mainly because of a girl that was in his Sunday school class. Every Sunday, he would sit with her as they passed the candy back and forth. In those days, a boy wasn't measured by how much money was in his pockets. If you had a pocket full of candy, then the girls would be happy to talk to you. And if you were lucky, she might even hold your hand during church service. He fell in love with Keisha from the very first sight. Keisha's family had moved to their neighborhood, and Grandma Pinky had invited them to come to their church. Every Sunday, he would take out some of his money that was meant for tithing and buy candy from the store across the street. Grandma, who was not proficient in reading and in writing, would never ask him how much money his mother had given him for the collection plate. When he would buy his candy, he would save a few pieces just for Keisha. For 3 weeks, Poet and Keisha were boyfriend and girlfriend, when suddenly she walked out of his life just as quickly as she entered. Keisha and her family founded another church that made them more comfortable. Poet continuously told himself it must have been the air conditioning. On Sunday morning, after Sunday school, service after Sunday school was over and service was getting ready to begin, Poet took his customary seat up front, right next to Grandma Pinky. It was his job to help her with the Bible. She only had a third grade education, so it was difficult for her to read and pay attention to the sermon at the same time. Poet, in his own in his hands, will highlight the things that the preacher was interpreting. As they spent their normal 5 to 6 hours in church, the first thing Poet wanted to do was play outside. However, he always was asked by Grandma Pinky to read back what he had highlighted. Poet never understood why he had to participate in this ritual, but it wouldn't be long before he found out that the importance of reading Grandma Pinky her Bible. His ability to write poetry had given him an opportunity to be accepted into Southview Performance Arts School. It was during his seventh grade year that he found out what the word racism meant. Miss K was his math teacher. Poet believed she was the meanest teacher, and to make matters worse, he was terrible at math. He thought to learn math was impossible, and Miss K, she didn't make it any easier. There were times when he would raise his hand in class when he had a question, and she would make him wait. As Poet waited to be called, other questions would pop into his head, but Miss K, as usual, would continue to make him wait. Poet would get completely lost with the daily lessons because of how great his struggles were at home. With his math scores falling further and further behind, Poet knew he had to get help, if he was going to continue to stay at Southview. To be a student, you couldn't fail any core classes. It was a Monday. Poet skipped poetry club and went to see Miss K after school to ask her for help. Tutoring he needed. She told him she was busy and he would have to make an appointment. Miss K was standing with another teacher when he asked her what time would be good. She barked, "Don't you see me here talking?" Not wanting to escalate the situation further, he left the room, upset, knowing he would have to find help from someone else. Halfway down the hall, he realized he left his book on the table in his classroom. He turned and walked back, and as he approached the door, he overheard Miss K talking to another teacher. Not knowing he was standing by the door, he heard Miss K say his name. Interested in what she was saying, he paused and waited by the door, listening patiently to the words that would pour out her mouth. "I don't understand why they put kids in this school who just because they have a special talent. As far as I'm concerned, kids who can't make it academically shouldn't be here. I don't think that little nigger will ever make it anywhere." After hearing her words, he left without being seen. Poet went home with his mind wondering if she was right. Would he ever make it? Would he really be a nobody? Tears fell from his eyes. The more doubt that entered his mind, the more tears began to fall. His walk home became a mental journey. When Poet walked into the house, he walked straight past Grandma Pinky's room without saying hi. This was unusual. Grandma Pinky went into his room to see what was wrong. With tears still in his eyes, he shared what had happened. She felt his hurt and pain and began telling him a story with a voice that could calm the deadliest storm. Let me tell you a story my mother once told me. There was a time when a group of people came over to this land on a boat. They were tied in chains and couldn't move on their own accord. They were shackled together in a room no bigger than this one, side by side on the top of each other. If they had to go to the bathroom, the person on the bottom became their toilet, and the one above you, well, you became a toilet for them. They were fed mush, maybe two, three times a week, and they had to eat it out of their hands. Oftentimes, they licked each other's fingers, trying to calm the hunger that would last for days. Sometimes there wasn't enough food to eat, and many of them would die from starvation. She asked Poet, "What will you eat on Thanksgiving Day?" Poet mentioned all the food that he would eat, from chicken to turkey and all the things in between. Poet, those people on that boat are your ancestors. How did we come from eating a handful of mush to having anything you could imagine all in one day? With his tears now dry, Poet looked at Grandma Pinky in shock. She stared back at him, her hand holding his chin. A lot of people had to fight and die for you to eat, but the one thing they didn't do was cry. So you dry your eyes because the blood that's in your veins is strong. It's been passed down to you from generation to generation with the hope that every time it's been passed down, the next generation will have a better chance at life than the last. Now you stop that darn crying because failure ain't no option. It's not a choice. Grandma Pinky's words dried Poet's tears as clearly as Kleenex. That night, unable to sleep, he stared into the darkness, thinking about his mother, his father, and Grandma Pinky. He thought about how much they sacrificed for him. He made the decision he would not give Miss K the satisfaction of seeing him fail and not live up to his full potential. After all, he was certain that his ancestors paved the way for him. He got out of his bed and he sat at his desk. He pulled out his journal and he wrote, "You say black is evil, but I say black is beautiful. When I held out my hands, you held yours back. Oh, are you afraid because I'm black? Is it my being black that makes you hate me? Fool, don't you understand it's my color that brings you peace in your sleep? And yet you still hate me. I think of your ignorance and it ease my pain, knowing your foolishness will one day bring about my fame. So keep it up, asshole, I say with a grin. The time is coming near, and you will shake my hand in. And you say black is evil. But you know what I say?" After writing his poem, he went back to bed and vowed to himself to work harder with as much passion as his father once exhibited. Miss K's racist and pessimistic words ran through his head and became his fuel. He replaced her hurtful words with "of that little nigger would never make it" with the thoughts of proving her wrong. He blurted, "What an asshole." Poet was determined that he would be respected. With repetitive thoughts of knowing that he would walk across his junior high graduation stage, he drifted off to sleep. Chapter 5, Poet's Middle Passage. as you can see in chapter 4, like a lot of students, racism um, is, um, racism itself is um, alive and well for a lot of students. And poet, would use that racism as a way to um, deal with the struggles that plagued him throughout his life. We're going to go ahead and take a break right here, and I will be back in about 2 minutes as I get my throat together and get something to drink. And we will start off with chapter 5, Poet's Middle Passage. Alrighty, we are back with chapter 5, Poet's Middle Passage. I hope you guys are enjoying the book. I myself is enjoying it, reading it to you. Let's start on chapter 5. Over the next 2 years, Poet displayed superior academic success in school. His writing skills flourished, and his math tutoring aided in his promotion to high school. Poet was succeeding, proving Miss K wrong. His adrenaline soon wore off after Miss K left his middle school to take another job. At 14, he entered high school and began to view life from a different perspective. His mother was still working, but they were still poor. He knew the burden his mother faced trying to raise him and pay the bills. His family struggles were continuing to increase as life threw different challenges. It was summer, 2 weeks before Poet's first day of school. He was filled with joy helping his grandmother work in her garden. He always enjoyed helping because he could always count on her to tell a good story. She also often offered a history lesson about their ancestors. His favorite was the story about a slave who came over on a boat from Africa. As Poet grew wiser, he knew that, like the slave man, he would face his own struggles. As they continued gardening, Grandma Pinky asked Poet to go get him something to drink. While inside, he spoke to his mother about Grandma Pinky in the gardening as she cleaned and cooked. He noticed her eyes and facial expression weren't the same during the conversation. The look on her face was stone cold. Mama, is everything okay? Frantically, she said, call 911 and hurry up. He was afraid that something was wrong with his mother and sprang into action. Racing for the phone, he glimpsed out over the window and saw Grandma Pinky on the ground, face down, nearly knocking him down. His mother ran outside. Within a few minutes, sounds of sirens could be heard coming from a distance. When the medics arrived, Grandma Pinky was unconscious, but she had a pulse. Poet's mother was holding her in her arms, screaming for her to wake up. Fighting tears, he calmed his mother and allowed the medics to prepare for transport. She was rushed to the hospital. The hospital brought back memories of his father. He asked his mother nearly the same painful question: Mama, is Grandma going to be all right? As if she remembered the question, she paused, sighed, and answered, I don't know. Minutes became hours when finally a doctor came into the waiting room. Good evening, Miss Thomas. My name is Dr. Fuentes. Your mother is in stable condition. However, she has slipped into a coma. Poet's mother handled the news fairly well. It was almost surprising to Poet. It seemed as if she had grown immune to the hardships and disappointments. She became inquisitive and asked about Grandma Pinky's health. Dr. Fuentes explained that Grandma Pinky had breast cancer. The words operation and chemotherapy and mastectomy were like bulldozers to hard exterior that his mother displayed. She wanted to be strong in front of Poet, but internally she wept, realizing the severity of the situation. Grandma Pinky was in a coma for about 2 weeks. Poet spent most of his days at the hospital sitting next to her. While his mother was at work, Poet sat in the hospital, sitting next to his grandmother while his mother was at work. Lockhart would often come visit and spend a few hours with him. The weekend before school started, Poet was sitting in the room, half asleep, when he heard his name in a soft whisper. Poet. Immediately, she jumped up and made his way towards the bed. He saw her proud eyes staring at him. Her smile that always seemed to be brightened his darkest days grabbed his heart. He knelt with tears flooding his face and kissed her. Poet phoned his mother and shared the good news. Within the hour, she was there, her excitement visible. They were relieved that Grandma was awake, but their excitement was short lived. According to Dr. Fuentes, Grandma's Pinky's cancer was extremely severe and the operation was needed immediately. Dr. Fuentes elaborated about the expensive treatments for cancer patients, but surgery was the best option. Poet's mother was relieved that Grandma Pinky had insurance, although the cost of treatment and surgery were mostly covered. There were some costs that needed to be paid for out of pocket, such as medication for recovery. Money was tight, but Poet's mother signed the papers and accepted the terms of Grandma Pinky's medical procedure. Poet knew it would be hard for his mother to take care of Grandma and work at the same time. He made it his duty not to complain about not having phone, cable, and money for clothes. And he knew that that money would be going towards bills. According to Dr. Fuentes, the surgery was a success. Most of the tumor was removed, and we still needed to start chemotherapy. Expect her to be very weak and tired. Bearing the resemblance of his father, Poet reassured his mother not to worry. We expect to release her within the next few days, Dr. Fuentes said. Grandma Pinky was now out of the hospital, and Poet was starting his first day in high school. When he walked outside to catch the bus, Lockhart was standing as usual, waiting for him. How is Grandma doing, man? She's okay. Been resting a lot, but she is moving around the house some. Not wanting to dwell on that topic any further, Poet quickly changed the subject. Man, I can't wait to get to school. I want to see them girls. Lockhart said, for what? You ain't gonna talk to none of them with your scary ass. Whatever. I bet you I get more numbers than you today. Bet, Lockhart replied. For Poet, school became not just a place for education, but a place where he could escape the realities of life at home. Lockhart had gotten bigger over the years and a whole lot crazier. During their middle school years, they attended different schools. Poet went to the Performance Arts School, and Lockhart, the local public school. The high school was huge, bigger than his middle school, Southview. You see, McDuffie High School didn't roll out the red carpet to new students. He had grown accustomed to being in an environment that provided him with constant guidance and security. Southview had strict rules and regulations. McDuffie High was a place where rules and regulations wasn't enforced by the teachers or the students. Walking down the wrong hallway at the wrong time could get you jacked or even jumped. With Lockhart as his best friend, Poet thought he would be fine. Lockhart knew most of the gang members at the school, and because of his size, few people bothered him. It was during lunch that Poet got into his first fight in high school. He found out that fighting gained respect. He knew his mother and grandmother wouldn't approve, but in this school, backing down from a fight wasn't an option. Standing in line, hungry, Poet last ate the night before. There were two things the menu that day on the menu that day: pizza and meatloaf. Nearly all the students bypassed the meatloaf and went straight for the pizza. Waiting, he thought, how the hell can you serve meatloaf and chocolate milk when that shit don't match? Poet quickly snapped back to reality when he realized there were only two slices left and one person in front of him. He waited for his turn. Looking at the last slice, he felt lucky. At that moment, an upperclassman, David, decided to jump in front of him, taking it. He was caught by surprise and told him to back up. David turned and said, and if I don't, what the fuck are you going to do about it? Before David could finish his rants, Poet slapped him across the face with his food tray. As David fell to the ground, Poet began kicking and found himself on the floor throwing punches. Neighboring teachers stepped in but could hardly contain Poet's aggression. They were both escorted to the office. For the first time in his life, Poet had been suspended from school. His mother, who had enough to deal with, had to leave work early and pick him up. Overcome by stress and anger, she cursed all the way home. What were you thinking, fighting on the first day of school? What the hell is wrong with you? Mama, that boy started with me. What was I supposed to do? Let him disrespect me? Your ass had me leave work over someone stealing some damn pizza? But Ma, shut up! I don't want to hear another word, his mother yelled. Poet stared out the window, his mind blank. He knew his mother didn't understand that it wasn't about the pizza. It was the fact that David thought he could take it from him. No matter what, Poet was determined not to be disrespected by anyone. When they got home, he went straight to his room. Grandma Pinky, sitting on the couch, asked why were they home so early. His mom replied, Paul was fighting in school and now he's suspended for 3 days. I had to take time off of work and pick him up, and now I have to work late tonight. Don't you take your ass out this house, you hear me? She continued her rant towards Poet. Still angry and upset, he didn't reply. He listened as she stormed out the house and pulled out the driveway. Later that night, word on the street was that David was in the game. The news traveled to Lockhart, and they were looking for retaliation. To him, retaliation meant anything from a fight to more extreme measures. Poet decided it would be best not to go out alone. 3 days went by slowly. He stayed in the house watching TV, sitting with Grandma Pinky, listening to her stories. On the last day of his suspension, Grandma Pinky needed a refill on her medication. Her medicine was nearly empty, so he walked to the pharmacy. Inside, he saw one of the boys from David's gang. He stared at Poet. Poet stared back. Poet went straight to the counter to order Miss Grandma's prescription. He turned around and noticed three additional boys staring. Getting jumped was the obvious thing that would happen if he stepped outside. He began to devise a plan, but he knew there was nothing he could do alone. His eyes glanced over at the clock. It was 2:30, and school would soon be ending. If I only had Lockhart, I'd be better off, he said to himself. Lockhart didn't get home until about 3:15. Mr. Jefferson, the pharmacist, got his attention. It's going to take about 30 minutes. Do you want to come back? He saw the boy standing on the corner, and he knew if he left, he wouldn't make it home. He told Mr. Jefferson that he'd wait. Let's see if they were willing to wait that long to fight, he thought to himself. Poet sat down on his stool and stared at the clock. If he waited long enough, Lockhart's bus would pull up, and he would have his back no matter what. After the time passed, Miss Jefferson called him to the counter to give him the prescription. Poet took the bottle, thanked him, and made his way towards the door. He didn't see the boys. Unsure, he walked around the store, browsing, wasting time, waiting for Lockhart's bus to appear. He looked out the store, and the school bus finally pulled up, and he watched the students get out the bus. He saw Lockhart horseplaying, trying to talk to some girl who was clearly not interested. Drawing attention, he yelled, Lockhart, what up? What up? Your mama finally let your ass out the house? Nah, she ain't home. I had to get grandma her medicine. Not wanting to sound like a punk, Poet mentioned nothing to Lockhart about the boys in the store and how he waited for his bus to come. Instead, he kept conversing normally, knowing that if anybody ran up on him, Lockhart would be down to fight. He was crazy. They walked back to the house together. Poet checked the mailbox, then he went inside to give Grandma Pinky her medicine. Lockhart came in and said hi. Grandma Pinky hugged him and said, How was my fat boy? Lockhart laughed. I'm cool, Grandma. Grandma questioned what took so long. He pretended not to hear her and went into the he threw and stumbled on a pink slip labeled Final Notice. It was from the rental office. They owed $500 by the end of the week. He knew immediately that his mother would come up with the money. And anxiety rushed in like a horse at the Kentucky Derby. Poet asked Lockhart to step outside to talk. Hey, yo, I gotta find a way to make some quick money. Confused, Lockhart asked, Bruh, what are you talking about? Man, we need $500 by Friday, and if not, we're going to get kicked out. Do you know how I can make some extra money? Lockhart blurted, Yeah, we can go get $200 if we carry a package for Big Meat. You know meat, right? Yeah, I'm down. Tell me what I need to do. On the first day back to school, Paul went with Lockhart to make the delivery. If everything went as planned, he'd be back home half an hour before his mother with $200 in his pocket. They picked up the package from Big Meat. I heard about you in your fight, he said. Lockhart told me about you. Poet knew David was in the rival game Big Meat was a part of, and that won him some cool points. They were given rules that and then left. They delivered the package as requested and returned with a different one for Big Meat. Upon delivery, he gave them their cash, and Poet and Lockhart left. Poet could not believe how easy it was to make that kind of money in such little time. On their way back home, they passed a local convenience store and saw David and his friends step out. They stared so hard that it seemed like they were drilling holes with their eyes. Lockhart responded shouting a bunch of jumbled derogatory words, and within minutes, all four of them were fighting. The fight didn't last long. Disappointed and not wanting the negative attention surrounding his pharmacy, Mr. Jefferson rushed to break it up and demanded them to leave his neighboring property. Poet remained the reigning champion, and Lockhart beats David's friend severely. They were both pleased with their outcome. When Poet got home, he noticed his mother's car was in the driveway. Poet strategized about how to explain why he wasn't being attentive to Grandma Pinky. Inside, he saw his mother sitting at the table with her bottle open and her cup nearby. Where were you? Out with Lockhart, Poet replied, not wanting to explain why he quickly walked into the room. Moments later, he returned and handed his mother the money. This should help out with the rent. Where you get this money from? Don't worry about it. Just pay the rent, Poet replied. You answer me. Where the hell did you get this money? I helped someone out. Dang, that's all. Why are you tripping, Ma? What happened to your damn shirt? Are your ass selling drugs, Poet? Mama, I'm not selling no drugs. Quickly trying to change the subject. Lockhart and I got into a fight, Ma. They tried to jump us. His mother quickly rose to her feet. I'm going to ask you one last time. Where the hell did you get this money? What difference does it make? You need the money. I saw the pink notice. We don't have time for questions. Just pay the rent. Poet didn't have time to prepare. The next thing he knew, his mother's hands came across his face, stinging him with the intensity of what could have been 100 bees. Who in the hell do you think you're talking to? I bought your ass in this world, and damn it, I promise you I'll take your ass out if you ever talk to me like that again. Get the hell out my house, she demanded. No son of mine would ever sell drugs and be a part of any gang. He went If you want to be that type of man, then you do it. But you do it outside my house. Mama, where will I go? I don't have anywhere to go, Poet said. I don't care, Poet. You get the hell out my house, she said unsympathetically. Mama, I'm sorry. I was only trying to help. I didn't want you to get hurt. I thought if we got kicked out the house, there would be no place for you and Grandma. He began to beg. Please don't kick me out. I'm sorry. His mother saw the tears in his eyes and gave into his sorrow. She gave him a hug. Poet stopped. Poet, stop all that crying. We will make it. We'll be okay. I understand how you feel, but I want you to think about how your father would feel if he knew about this. Poet shook his head in agreement and stated he would give the money back. Later that night, as he sat at his desk, Grandma Pinky came into the room. Poet, can I talk to you? Sure. I heard what happened. Do you remember the story about the man on the boat and all the struggles he endured? Yes, ma'am. Well, let me tell you why I told you that story. Listen, too many times you and young folks use your struggles as an excuse to go out and act a fool, experimenting with drugs and crime. The Lord knows. I see youngins all the time cursing and yelling and wearing breeches hanging halfway off their tails. They say life is hard and they have to go out and act a fool in order to take care of their families. Listen to me. I understand how hard life can get. I know all about waking up in the morning and looking in the refrigerator and there ain't no food. I know about going into the bathroom and turning on a faucet and having no water to wash your face. I lived with the struggle. I too had to fall asleep listening to the unforgiving sounds of parents fighting, sometimes using a candle to guide me through the darkened house because there weren't any lights and it was the only way to see. I was separated from my brothers and sisters, and that almost ripped my family apart. Grandma understands, poet, but nobody is born into this world with the opportunity to pick the hand that life deals. You have no control over what life you have been given. However, you do have control of how your life turns out to be. She asked Poet, what will you do? Will you do me a favor? Tell me who is that man in the picture on your wall? Martin Luther King Jr., he replied. Poet, he would say the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and conveniences, but at times of challenge and controversy. Our ancestors were dealt with a harsh life, greater than we could possibly imagine, and yet they stood still and strong. They didn't use their hardships as an excuse to give up. Instead, they took those hardships and they used it as motivation to gain something that they never had before: freedom. You have freedom. You have the ability to take your struggles and turn them into motivation. When you were brought into this world, it was already determined that you would be successful. I watched your mother hold you in her arms. She said you would be special. Being a gang member or a drug user was not an option. The only thing we can change is the color of our skin and the fact that we're going to one day die. Since your father died, your mother has been crying tears of pain. Don't you think it's about time that she cries tears of joy? Your mother doesn't want gifts, honey. Listen, give her the greatest gift a mother could ever have. Give her a chance to brag about you. He listened to the wise words of a woman whose education extended far beyond any book. He thought about that man's journey on that boat and the path he must now take. He promised himself that the struggles that awaited him would not be his downfall. Chapter 6. So we can see that Poet decided that he himself was going to try and um, make money for his family by trying to sell drugs. And that became sort of a challenge to him, um, between trying to take care of his family as a young man now and trying to be the good kid that his mother and grandmother expected. And that was tough on them. And that's a lot of kids today. This is why they're out there on the streets doing the things that they're doing. A lot of them are trying to take care of their family, and they're looking for an immediate gratification that they hope will one day make them famous or bring about the satisfaction that they've been seeking. And so they're poet. It is now 8:39. I don't think we're going to be able to get through the whole book tonight. I thought we would have, but we're going to finish here with chapter 6. And I think I would do this again. I do know there are some people who were saying they couldn't get on the live stream. I'm not sure what happened, so I apologize if you weren't able to get on tonight. I will look into that after I finish, and I may come back and do this again either tomorrow or next week. I do have a training next week, so I may not be able to do it next Saturday. But I will do this again for those who was hoping to get on and was unable to do it. So we'll make sure that uh, we will do this again and make sure that, and it might have been, um, I had it um, blocked. So what we would do is, I apologize for that. I didn't know that the lock was on. That had it private. So I will make sure that um, we would do this again tomorrow to make sure that everybody has a chance to see it. For those who did see it, I do want to say thank you for listening. Um, but we will close out tonight with chapter 6. And tomorrow we will go live with this again and try to make this happen again next tomorrow. Um, and make sure that it is live for the public to view. I do see the lock on the screen. One of the listeners who's on YouTube told me that it's only viewed by Kevin, and I'm not sure why that happened because I made it open to the public. But we'll make sure it's live tomorrow for everybody to see. But for those who are streaming along right now on YouTube and has access to it, I want to make sure that you get a chance to hit chapter 6. And then tune in tomorrow, or you can start off from chapter 7 for yourselves. And for those who missed the first chapter, we will start again tomorrow and make sure that we have this live for you. Again, this is just me trying to provide some of the entertainment for those tonight who are kind of stuck in the house, and just give you something to listen to as we do this. And I hope you are enjoying Poet Thomas's um, story and some of the things that he is going through. Chapter 6: America, we have a problem. Poet kept his promise to his mother. He worked hard in school and kept himself out of trouble for the remainder of the year. His grades vastly improved, and he was awarded at the end of the year for the honor roll. The year passed, and Poet completed his first year of high school. At 15, looking good was just as important as doing well. Poet knew his mother couldn't afford to buy the clothes he wanted, but the more Lockhart picked on his clothes, the more he wanted new ones. There was only one major problem. He w- how was he going to get them? He thought, I could steal, but he remembered the promise to his mother. Every time he thought about stealing, his father's words would ring in his head. A man that steals is not respected, but a man who earns is respected by everyone. Stealing was out of the question. He thought about how much money he could make if he was still willing to work with Lockhart, carrying the packages for big meat. He knew his mother found out if his mother found out, it would break her heart and she would kick him out the house. He thought long and hard about what he could do. He thought about a job, but he knew there wouldn't be anyone to care for grandma while his mother was at work. His mother always said that school was his job. Poet's prayers were answered one day while sitting on the porch with Grandma Pinky. It's hot out here today, Grandma. Yes, honey, I don't know how long I'm gonna sit out here today. I swear I saw the devil with the lemonade stand saying with a sign that Jesus is the right way to go. Poet belted out with a laugh, amused by her sense of humor. He loved the days when they would sit on the porch and talk about life. It reminded him of the days he spent with his father. During their conversations, he looked across the street and noticed Miss Louise cleaning her yard, cutting grass. Grandma Pinky said that that woman's going to catch a heat stroke in this sun. He knew that was his clue to go over and help. Grandma Pinky said he would be fine while he went across the street. Miss Louise happily agreed to let him finish her yard work, and while she took his place next to his grandmother, within an hour, he had completed the task of mowing the lawn and raking the leaves. He even put down the fertilizer in his garden. Miss Louise gave him $50 and asked could he help more often. He happily replied yes. News spread faster than wildfire about Poet's yard work skills. Within weeks, it seemed like every elderly woman within 3 blocks wanted his help. He made a schedule to complete all their yard work. In return, he was paid for his services, and the ladies kept Grandma Pinky entertained. By the end of the summer, Poet saved $800. It was enough to help his mother finally buy him some brand name brand clothes. By the end of the summer, Lockhart and Poet went to the mall. The weekend before school started, they spent their money on buying new clothes. He spent $300 on new clothes and shoes. Lockhart, who made more from hustling, had even a greater amount to spend. Poet, I thought you made $800. Is that all you got? Yeah, I gave Mama 500 to help with the bills. Oh, that's what's up. Do you need more money? You know I got your back. No, man, I'm good. Appreciate it though. After Poet and Lockhart left the mall, they ran into the gang that they had fought earlier that year. David was in jail for robbery, but Lockhart's involvement with Big Meat's gang kept an ongoing rivalry. They started arguing with each other, cursing and making a fuss. Security came and forced them to break it up. Luckily they didn't fight. Poet and Lockhart left on a city bus and headed home. That night, Poet was so excited about the new clothes he could hardly sleep. He spent most of the night mixing and matching his outfits until he became tired. The next morning, Poet woke up with a lot of energy. While getting dressed, he opened his window and he noticed the weather. Damn, rain. But despite the rain, his spirits wasn't broken. To protect his new shoes, he ran to the kitchen and grabbed two Walmart bags. Grandma Pinky shouted, "Where are you going with them bags on your feet? It's raining outside, and I don't want to get my shoes wet." "It's just water," Grandma Pinky said sarcastically. "Grandma, I can't get the new kicks wet. I paid too much for 'em." "I suppose so. You did work hard. I guess I can't understand." Poet leaned over and kissed Grandma Pinky on the forehead. "Bye. See you when I get home. I love you." "Okay, baby. Love you too." For the first time in his life, Poet went to school with name brand clothes and shoes. He felt proud and assured. He began his sophomore year with confidence. He had a steady money source that allowed him to help his family. His clothes gave his image a boost, and his grades couldn't have been better. His first semester had gone well, and with all the hard work cutting grass, he was able to buy both his mother and grandmother a Christmas present for the first time. While it was nothing expensive or fancy, you could tell by the look on both of their faces when they opened them up. Going into his second semester, Poet thought about participating in the debate team. Despite all the excitement, he sat in class looking out the window, wondering about life. What would happen next? Things were going well in school, but home life couldn't have been worse. Grandma Pinky's illness took a toll on the house budget. Her bills began to affect the ability to pay for lights, water, and rent. His daydream was interrupted by the sound of his name being called. Miss Hanks, the English teacher and debate team coach, appeared excited. "Poet, can you tell us how your Christmas break went?" He always hated that part of the class because he knew Christmas in his neighborhood didn't offer the same joy that many of his classmates experienced. Instead of giving his normal "it was okay," Poet got quiet. He looked at his classmates and he began to describe his lifestyle in a poem to everyone in the class who eagerly waited for his answer. "Some say America is the land of opportunity. Well, I must have been blind all my life because that land I have yet to see. I can't see the land you call opportunity, but these eyes can surely see the land of poverty. Why are my eyes blinded to your world? I do not know. I guess it's the land in which I live that won't let me go. I look up into my sky. There are no stars at nights. My refrigerator has no hope. My home, no lights. Tears of pain roll down from her face as she holds me in her arms, grasping me tight. When she cried, I cried, hypnotized by her eyes with no future in sight. Looking out my door and all I can see, friends with no shoes and news at their feet. I don't know what's in my future, but I can't ponder what lies ahead. The agony of today is what I face, asking my neighbors for bread. We worry about today because tomorrow is never known. My land holds this dark cloud over my head and my future is never shown. I turn on my faucet, but there is no water coming out. This must be a symbol of my life, swallowed by drought. Take a look out my window and tell me what you see. If this is the land of opportunity, then I must have been blind because that land I have yet to see. After his poem, the class remained quiet, amazed at the eloquence and truthfulness of his poem. Lockhart interrupted the quietness by snapping his fingers together, and the class laughed and joined. Miss Hanks brought the class back to attention and looked at him. Poet, I want to see you at the class. He had no idea what she wanted. After class, Miss Hanks mentioned that she enjoyed reading his writings and poems. She suggested he enter a writing contest where the winner would win $1,000. After hearing the words win and $1,000, there was no doubt in Poet's mind that he would enter the contest. He asked Miss Hanks about the topic. The essay would be focused on hardships that the students had faced throughout their life. He accepted the challenge and was eager to get started. That night, he sat at the table. He thought about what would open the eyes of the readers and what would make him stand out as the winner of the contest. Winning would be great, beyond great. He could really use the money to help his mother around the house. The winner would go on and also get to read their essay at a banquet in front of their family and friends. With all the hardships his family had endured, he wanted so much to give them a chance to brag, just like Grandma Pinky said. So we are going to stop there. It is now 8:52. We have a lot more left in this chapter, and I don't want to rush through it. Um, and so we will continue this tomorrow. I promise you, I'll start a little bit earlier. Um, I apologize for the mix up tonight. This is my first time doing a live stream. So um, on Facebook. I have done live streams on YouTube, and I think that one is running perfectly fine. I've done trainings and things on my YouTube channel, but this is my first time actually doing a live stream on Facebook. And so there's this little small thing on this corner up here that says a lock that says only me. So I believe I'm the only one who is viewing this on Facebook. I had a couple people say they couldn't see it on Facebook, so I wanted to apologize to the Facebook family. So tomorrow on Facebook, starting at 5 o'clock. I will go live with Poet Thomas. We will start from the beginning. Let's make this happen again to try to give you some entertainment. No pressure for anybody. I just wanted to provide a little bit of fun tonight for you and your family, a little reprieve to get away from the being stuck inside the house. Like you, I'm tired of being inside this house and I'm ready to get out of this house and let life get back to normal. Working from home is different. So again, thank you guys for watching tonight. And as I stated, that Poet Thomas is available in the book, the full book, on Amazon. That's in paperback. You can buy the ebook as well. Um, if you would like to buy the book, I always thank you for your support in that manner. But again, thank you for participating this evening. And I will go ahead and make sure that tomorrow I um, start the Facebook Live with the YouTube. For those who are currently watching on YouTube, you can catch it on YouTube again tomorrow. But I make sure that it is unlocked and it is actually live for everyone to see. Uh, I just read that whole thing and I'm upset with myself because nobody can see it. But that's okay. Those who are on YouTube was able to see it, and I thank you for tuning in and listening with the night with poet. But we will do round two tomorrow. Again, I apologize, and we will start at 5 o'clock, and we will get through the whole book as promised. All right, you guys have a great night. Mr. Kevin is out.